every day to the world and to your heart. Open up your eyes and let your spirit start. Say yes to the dreams you hold inside. Let your soul be your guide.
In today's complex mortgage world, finding the right direction can be challenging. That's where Lighthouse Advisors comes in. With over 25 years of experience, we provide fractional leadership and executive oversight, guiding companies through transitions, growth, and innovation. From IMBs to brokers to credit unions to tech firms, our team of seasoned professionals is here to shine a light on solutions, ensuring your business thrives in every environment. At Lighthouse Advisors, we don't just guide, we empower. Together, let's create a ripple of success across the industry. Email us today at laura@lighthouseadvisors.com. Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Wednesday Wisdom. Today, we are joined by the incredible Rick Roque. He is a banker, technology entrepreneur, educator, and the co-founder at Menlo. With a career that began in Silicon Valley in the 90s, Rick is known for creating innovative solutions that enhance consumer experience and drive growth. He's a sought-after speaker and thought leader, and Rick has advised hundreds of mortgage lenders nationwide on M&A, technology, and strategy. He's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Inside Mortgage Finance, and more, and has spoken at over 50 industry events. Rick brings vision, technology, and user experience to deliver transformation, profitability, and long-term value. Thank you so much for joining us today, Rick.
Yeah, that's great. It's good to finally not just be on your show, but just to talk and interact. I mean, our careers have intersected over so many years, and sometimes it's good. It's always good to sort of have a look forward in the business and where the business is going. But sometimes it's good to connect with people who are rooted and who've been around, since the late 90s or early 2000s, and we've seen cycles and we've seen companies come and go. And sometimes it's good to kind of reflect on those questions around why the market did one thing or why one company grew and why other companies didn't grow. So it's really nice to meet you. I've been to a number of your panels that you've moderated at different conferences, and I think we're both speaking. I'm speaking at the New Jersey Association conference. I think you're speaking there as well.
I am. Yes.
So I'm very much looking forward to spending some time with you.
Isn't it interesting how much things have changed, because years ago, before social media and before a digital presence, right, you didn't interact as much in terms of meeting new people. I know for myself, when I was building my company, I was kind of focused in and head down and kind of, within those walls. So unless you did business with my company, I really didn't know many people out there. And nowadays, we live in such a wonderful time when we can interact, not just in person, but digitally, and then connect and then meet face to face. So I'm very excited that we're actually going to interact and be face to face when we go to that conference in Atlantic City.
No, isn't it great though? Before social media, like all we had were conferences, and when I was on the leadership team at Calyx back in 07, 08, 09. We used to be members of most of the state associations. I want to say all 50, but
wow.
Most of them, maybe 47, 48, 49 states. And we used to be on the boards of these state associations. So I used to speak even back then. I mean, I've spoken at over 50 conferences since probably 2013, but even prior to that, I used to speak at maybe 20 or 30 conferences a year, in large part because not so much of, I think I had some unique insights coming from Calyx at that time because so much transactional volume was coming through Point, the platform. And I remember it being so unique where, and this at the time was super innovative, where I could tell you, we could see where loan volume was beginning to uptick based on credit polls and different MSAs around the country. And that was sort of that was sort of unique,
Yeah, at that time, yes.
And I remember saying to people, I know when people when their children start school, because
Oh,
I could tell that week when credit pulls either in August or early September were beginning to drop because moms and dads are bringing their kids to school.
They were focused on that. Yep.
Focused on something different, and holidays and different like we would map out Jewish holidays or Christian holidays based on certain MSAs, and we could almost predict who to call, when to call, and what their transactional volume was going to be based on just the activity within points. So I would share a lot of that data at industry conferences, but it was great to be able to go to like Idaho in the the North and South Dakota Association, just to be able to talk to local mortgage brokers and mortgage bankers and depository leaders about the business. And I loved the local quality of leadership, because it used to be, real estate was local and mortgage lending very much was local. You were the local mortgage lender. And I think it really has shifted in the sense of now all of a sudden companies, it used to be West Coast companies, there's no way they'd be, successful East Coast, and East Coast with no way to be successful in the West Coast. But now, because of technology and proximity and just culture, the ability, you're not safe anymore being the local lender. Right? Not. Because so many non-local lenders can really tap into your market, and it doesn't take much to erode your market share as a local lender.
And vice versa. And vice versa, having the opportunity for the people that were kind of stuck in one local market, now they can expand. So working both ways, right? And I want to actually go into that, right? So obviously you've been in the industry for a very long time. And this show is about sharing wisdom, right? Sharing insights. So the first thing I'd like to know is, what is a piece of advice or wisdom that has guided your decision-making and kind of things that you've learned over the course of your career in the mortgage industry? What is that?
It's funny. I talk with Greg Scher a lot about this in my work with NFM especially, and it's interesting because this industry is extremely not in a negative way, but it's extremely dynamic. I was going to say it's extremely volatile, but it's been volatile too. One leader said to me yesterday, I'm sure you know Johnny Fowler, who's been around forever. He was saying, Rick, the last normal year we've had in this business was 2019. And it's really fascinating.
2019, I can remember the vibe and what was happening.
Oh,
then.
For sure,
yes,
for sure. I mean, it's but when you look at like all the change that's occurred from 2010 to 2013 with the the momentum of the CFPB, 2015 the TRID, and then there was somewhat an acclimation, but there was margin in
I was going to say you had margin compression in there. You had a big refi boom, and then it went away, right?
Yeah, then 2018 came, everything came to a stop, and then 2018 things kind of normalized, and then all of a sudden, COVID happens in 2020, and then we're back on the roller coaster. So it's so adaptability is so remarkably important for companies, and it's not just a thing that you say. It's really it's an attitude you have to have. You have to have the sense of adaptability to say, like, we have to pivot. We got to figure out ways where even companies, I always tell companies, most companies are, and there's a few that are an exception to this, but most companies can still grow in down markets by simply going into new markets.
Great.
Right? So if they're down 20 or 25% in their local MSA or the MSA that they're currently operating in, establishing the leadership and being able to sort of more acutely target markets that you're not in, that you feel like you are relevant or could be relevant in that market, be a fresh brand. It's just a matter of thinking differently. And a lot of part of it's the age. A lot of us are getting older in the business, but those of us who are even older than we are, who are running companies, they're looking for that way of either winding down or stabilizing their business for longevity's sake, to give it to their son. I talked to a guy yesterday from Grapevine, Texas, who wants to have his son take over his business and have his son kind of ride the rodeo. But for the most part, because of age and differing priorities, it's harder to pivot the older we get, and so that's why, really leaning on hungry younger leadership within the organization, that late 30s, early 40s kind of hungry leadership is kind of important, because they're a lot more. You don't have to get out of the rodeo, but you can't ride the bull anymore. Correct. But you can have others on your team ride that bull, and you just be the coach on the sidelines. And this is what I love about your career too, is because you've had a lot of, you have the ability to mentor and provide a lot of advice and guidance to people in the industry because of your longevity. You've had staying power. You've added a lot of insight and wisdom to a lot of people. And you're at that age where you can take people under your wing and be like, look, it's going to be okay. We're going to figure this out sort of together.
It's actually funny that you say that. So two comments, right? So the first comment is, and people have probably even heard me say this, so it's interesting you said about adaptability. Do you know Tony Robbins actually does a whole speech about the number one skill for success is adaptability. So what you just said is so valuable. And anyone that's been in the mortgage industry understands that's the key to everything, is being able to navigate all of that, right? So you've hit it spot on, but sometimes we can't see it if we've been looking at it for too long, right? Like if we've been running a company day in and day out for the last 20 years or 25 years or 30 years, sometimes you can't see the blind spots. Sometimes you can't see what's happening in front of you. So you do need that new talent to come in, and that leadership team. You use the word dynamic. You want to make sure your leadership team is diverse in many different ways. Expertise, different aspects, because you're bringing in that different perspective to be able to have that voice. So 100% agree. And then the comment about my career, it's interesting. I had mentioned to you that I was in my office every day working, 16, 18 hours a day building a company. And it wasn't until margin compression in 18 when I was like, I got to figure out how to get more volume, because you have to do double the volume to make the same profit that you were making doing half the volume, right? And that was the first time that I left my office. That was the first time I went to conferences. I didn't go to conferences until 2018 because I was busy running a company, right? So the minute that happened, specifically for me, the women leaders were like, Laura, we don't normally see women executives on the stage or at these conferences to be able to give that guidance back. And that's been a blessing, because to me, I didn't see things in male or female, or I didn't see it like that. I saw it in executive, right? Executive to executive. It doesn't make a difference of what gender somebody is, right? But yet, that's not the case for everybody. Meaning some women still get caught up of how do I have that voice at the table? Now, I will tell you, in the year 2025, I believe we all have a voice at the table. I don't think that's a thing at this moment, right? So I think whoever you are, we all have a voice to share. That's for sure.
Well, you grew up in Jersey, so I think that Jersey girls are a different kind of breed when it comes to their ability to be executives and leadership. You're not going to tell a Jersey girl to sit back and be quiet. So I think you were definitely raised to be a leader in just in that way. But I agree with you. There's a lot of women in this business. I do encourage to get another female leader, like Cindy Ertman and I we've been friends forever.
Love Cindy.
And I've plugged in young women with her, because I think it's important for young women to have older women who've been in the business, preferably in their late 40s or early 50s, who've sort of cut their teeth in the business. They've raised kids, they've done the balance, and they've been able to do it. And then you see some young woman in their early 30s trying to figure it out. There's no better leader than that voice, right? Because I don't care what, I think it's always a bit of a trap, I think, to have a male executive to be a mentor to a woman. But I do think that if there was a preference, I would prefer to match up that late 40s, early 50s woman who's been in the business a while to mentor that early 30 something. And that was interesting. I was talking to Gary Acosta not too long ago about this, where I know all the politics around DEI and so on have sort of crumbled, and so DEI to some degree is no longer. A lot of corporate relationships have sort of walked away from the formalities and the different protocols of DEI. But diversity has really never been more important than today, right? And the reality is, and I've been probably saying this since 2015, where the future of this business is Black and brown, right? When you look at immigration trends, you look at first-time home buying trends, you look at the amount of, even in 2018, when margin compression hit, volumes really dropped, and mortgage companies were suffering for production. You look at Black and Latino home ownership, and it's lagging so dramatically from the white counterparts that if there's room to grow, if there's actual business, like an available market that can grow in a down market, it's that particular segment because it's already lagging.
Agree.
In boom times, it's sort of counterintuitive, but in boom times, no one's trying to, I call it wrench the rag. No one's trying to get as much business out of the market because the market's giving you so much business.
Right.
But when markets are down, it's a great opportunity, and this is the pivot mentality. It's a great opportunity when markets are down to be able to figure out, like, where should we be getting business that we're not. And when you just look at the average home ownership rate for Black and Latino home households, even if it moves up a couple ticks in your local MSA or in your state, that's a substantial amount of business. But mortgage companies they're used to sort of being spoon-fed the business, and they're not really used to going out and getting it and aggressively segmenting the market, figure out who are the non-owner Black and Latino households, and actually how do you go after that business?
Yeah.
Who are the Black realtors? Who are the Latino realtors? And actually engaging with them. Are you doing so it kind of gets
and
to
the Hispanic opportunity. It's one of the fastest growing rates, in first time home buyer, and single women. Single women are outpacing the single males by leaps and bounds, right? So to your point, there are these pockets of opportunity. But listen, I've sat on a lot of DE&I panels over the last years, and from what they say is there is such apprehension and they were burned during the downturn and the subprime times. So we did not serve well in some of those communities.
Oh,
so
no doubt.
there is a lot of work to be done to make sure that we are helping them and not just looking at going after them because of the opportunity, right? That we're truly
100%.
serving.
Yeah, that's a great distinction, and that's an important one because, I've often, I think it was 2014, 2015, I was instructing a company to get licensed in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts has a particularly rigid stance around minority lending, right? Okay. And they actually they kind of took what the CFPB did, and of course Elizabeth Warren is from Massachusetts, and they had certain CRA requirements that typically were applicable to banks, but they applied them to non-depository lending institutions. And that scared a lot of non-depository lenders to actually work in Massachusetts. And I was talking to this one mortgage company, and so we should get licensed in Massachusetts. I have a lot of relationships there. We could really get some good production there. And he was like, I don't really like their CRA requirements. And I said, I get it, right? But the fact that I mean, in essence, I was like, you just don't want to lend to Black and sort of minority neighborhoods. Like, why don't you just say it?
Right. Wow.
Don't just shield it by saying I don't want to because I don't like their CRA requirements. It's like, what's the downside of doing some marketing and doing some some first time home buyer seminars in Black and Latino neighborhoods? Because there was a lot of immigrants from the Dominican Republic, from not Puerto Ricans or U.S. citizens, but people coming from Puerto Rico, people coming from Dominican Republic and from Haiti coming into Massachusetts, at the time, and they just simply didn't want to do it. And I was like,
Wow.
dude, my view is that like if we're a government enterprise and part of being a Fannie Freddie Ginnie institution is you're sharing into certain, not just economic, but certain social objectives around home ownership, because communities are better when people are owning a home, right? Communities are just demographically more stable. Their educational systems are more stable. Crime is lower in communities that have higher rate of home ownership. And so if we want to accomplish certain social objectives, home ownership is a social path for a more peaceful civil society. And I take that seriously. I think we should, and I've always been an advocate. If you're Fannie Freddie Ginnie, and if I were Fannie Freddie Ginnie, I would lean into that to say, like, look, regardless of what the regulatory obligations are, we're going to expect of you like meaningful strides in these communities, because that's why we exist. That's
100%.
To be able to expand home ownership. But
yes, 100%. So, okay. So Rick, we know.
But that's the pivot. But to get to your point, Laura, that's the pivot. Like in 2013, 14, you had Kristen Mazzarelli, you had a handful of very, very few people saying, look, millennials are coming. Now millennials are here and there's Gen Z, right? In 2015, 16, it was the minority home buyer. The minority home, the minority household is coming, right?
Yeah.
And now they're here, right?
Yes.
Single women, like you said, when I was at cross country, 1 in 4, about 23% of all of our loans were done to single applicant females, either by divorce because they're single or just by postponing marriage. And it's kind of like, strategically, what are we doing to specifically cater to these segments that we didn't have to cater to necessarily 10 years ago because it wasn't a market force? Now that they're a market force, how are we catering to women? And here's an example of like I wanted to partner with Spanx. So I called, forget her last is Blakely, the founder of Spanx. Sarah Blakely, and I didn't speak with her, but I spoke to one of her like senior executives, and I said, I want to create a partnership where there's some value add. You market us as like the female lender to your customers, which are predominantly female, and then we're going to do something special if there's a female sort of borrower on the application, or if it's a single applicant female. And it's that kind of innovative thinking that really could help. That's unique. Nobody does that kind of thing in the business, right? Mm-hmm. But you have to sort of figure out ways you could add value to the female borrower, to the Latino household, or to the Black homeowner in a way that lenders have never done, but sort of done it before.
Yeah, and I'm gonna add to that. But I'm gonna add to that. So it was probably maybe 3 years ago. I was on a panel at NAMBA, okay? And we were speaking about this exact topic, okay? So I get off the stage and I have a young woman, a Black young woman come up to me and she's like, can I speak to you? And I'm like, 100%. We go in the back of the room, we sit down, and she said, Laura, everything you said is great. I love the fact of what we're doing for the community. She said, but let me tell you something. She's like, every single time that a recruiter calls me from one of these national lenders, she goes, and they tell me we're focused on your community. We're here to serve. We're here to do this. She goes, and you want to know what happens when I go there? Not one person on their executive team looks like me. Not one person understands what it's like to lend in my community. She goes, then I bring loans in. And you want to know what happens? The operations team doesn't understand how we save money, how we look at things with credit, what happens with our level of trust. She goes, and then I can't get my loans through because nobody understands my community. She goes, so it's really great and everybody wants to help and everybody wants to say that they're here for my community, but are they truly here? And I was blown away by this conversation.
Yeah, no, it's a very valid point. I think the hard part with some of the DEI initiatives was it really didn't get to the heart of the issue. It imposed sort of an expectation on lenders to do it, but it didn't get to the heart of the issue. So you had lenders or organizations or businesses check the DEI box. Well, we have a diversity officer, and it's like, well, what are you doing with that role? does that person have a meaningful voice? Is there an actual strategy at work that actually is excited and sort of enthusiastically going after these communities? Because not only, of course, it's going to be great for the bottom line, but it's going to be great for communities. It's going to be great to be able to lend to communities that you haven't really lent to in the past. And to your point, you can't lend to an audience that you yourself don't represent.
Exactly.
Right. And if you don't have that makeup, if you don't have the gender makeup or the racial makeup or the diversity sort of makeup within the organization, you simply aren't going to have the ability to sort of articulate the kind of vision that resonates within those populations that you really need to have in order to be successful in those populations. So
100% agree. 100%. And that we didn't expect to have this conversation, but it was a good conversation. So thank you for that.
But it's all about reading the tea leaves. To me, it's all about pivoting. It's all about seeing where the market is going. And so I'll tell, especially, executives, a lot of owners are, 60 and 65 years old and up. And I'm like, what are you doing to actually service, Black and brown communities? Because that's the future. If you actually say you want to be part of this business 10 years from now, what are your investments in AI and technology? What are your investments in actual communities of color? Because the reality is, dude, like the future of mortgage lending doesn't look like you and I, right? The future of mortgage lending, is going to go to the immigrant. It's going to go to the Puerto Ricans. It's going to go to the Dominicans. It's going to go to the Haitians. It's going to go to the Black households that have been underserved for too long. So, but that to me is all. It's not really about diversity. I mean, of course, that's one sort of takeaway, but it's really about how you're able to adapt to the market you're selling to.
Exactly.
So to me, that this is all an extension of that adaptability. And if people aren't thinking that way, they just want the same vanilla, conventional, conforming kind of product. I just don't think you're going to be that successful.
Agree. And with that, listen, we know that there's so much change happening right now in every different aspect of our industry. What do you see that's happening right now that is shaping the mortgage industry of the future? And yes, I understand that leaders should be looking for those spots, looking for those opportunities, looking at ways to adapt to be able to serve the future families that are going to be coming into the market. What's your advice for them? How right now, today, to the leaders that are listening to this, what action should they be taking?
Leaders of mortgage companies? Well, I mean, really two things. One, I would have a really hard, I would ask yourself some really hard questions about how well capitalized you are, because there's three things you really need to be successful in today's market. You need to have a very strong net worth. You need to have at least $4 or $5 million or more in the bank.
I was going to say minimum. Yeah.
Absolutely minimum.
Minimum.
Minimum. If you're a small company doing, 500 million to 700 million a year, to me, it's not about the production volume. To me, it's about how much money do you have in the bank. And if you have between $5 and $7 million in the bank, I think you have some investment capital that you can leverage to be able to expand either on the recruiting front or to invest directly in outsourcing or in AI and new technologies. But so that number one, I would have a very hard conversation with myself around how much capital do you really have to be able to survive. Okay. Number two, look, the reality is people think AI is kind of like blockchain, where it's sort of a fad that's kind of here and then it's and it'll be gone. It's sort of a technology fad. The reality is you are incredibly mistaken in this regard. I know a lot of companies, NFM included, we're expecting to sort of double our production volume and only add maybe about 20 to 25% of overhead. Where it used to be like for every 22 to 30 files you have to underwrite, every month you need a single underwriter, and for every 15
your capacity models, right? Your capacity
you had these
models.
sort of very linear capacity models, which were very expensive because you had to hire up, train, you had to find the right people, and more than likely for every 10 people you hire, you've only hired maybe 3 that are the right ones. So there's a cost associated to that attrition and trying to churn and find new people. And the reality is AI is really planarizing our workforce in a way where we're able to sort of grow our production volume and really sort of minimally increase our overhead. So with investments in AI, in especially offshoring, but most companies think, well, I'm too small to offshore. And the reality is you're not. You're small. You're being small to offshore is great when you start. And then as you grow, it gives you the opportunity for growth, because then as you grow, it becomes a waterfall effect where your margin expansion becomes substantially greater. After about an additional maybe 25 or 30 million a month, you really begin to feel that additional benefit of having outsourced. AI is accelerating that model in such a unique way. So if you're not using AI for legal audit reviews, if you're not using AI, or there's certain technologies out there that'll help you in your underwriting, and especially LOAs. These are functions that are all either going to go away, or these are functions that are largely going to be minimally hired for. The days of the $125,000 underwriter are over. It's like these are roles that will be minimally hired for, because AI is going to be able to take over the rest. So if you don't have the capital, if you're not investing in AI, and you're not looking to grow aggressively, and this is the leadership side of it, if you don't have the real leadership, the experienced leadership, not someone you trust. Someone you trust is important, but there's a lot of companies that hire people or who have people in positions of authority because they trust them, but they simply don't have the experience of having grown an organization. You're just not going to be successful. You will not do it. I'd say the fourth piece is you have to be very humble, very, very humble, and have some introspection around what your weaknesses are as an organization. I was talking to one company yesterday, and they're doing about 5 billion or so in production, and they're like, Rick, we want to do 30 billion. And I'm like, well, that's great. We all want to grow.
I was going to say.
We all want to do that. But do you have the capital? I went through the same thing. Do you have the capital? Are you investing in AI? And do you have the leadership? And are you asking yourself the question, why aren't you doing 30 billion today?
Right.
Don't sit there and point to, I hired this guy, he was a loser. I hired that guy, he was a loser. I hired that person, she was a loser. Blah. Yeah. Well, I see a lot of finger pointing as to why you're not growing, right? Well, what has made you a loser? Because right now you're doing 5 billion, that's great. But you're losing in your own mind. You're not doing 30 billion. So you're losing. So what are you doing to screw up this organization so that you're not being able to, achieve the goal that you're setting out? And he was like, well, that's a question we need to ask. I said, that's the first question. I was
going to say that's number one.
That's the first question you have to ask. So, that's why, I think that those are the four. I started with 3, but those are the 4 things.
I think that's the most important one. I think honestly, the way you started at the last, I think that's the beginning, and then you're kind of working backwards, right? I think those points are spot on. I think it's extremely important for everyone out there to realize that, listen, it's been, you said it. The last time we were stable in consistency was 2019. We are almost midway through 25 here already, right? That's been a very long time.
It's incredible.
There were points where we froze, where we were like, okay, we're kind of dumping bodies off the boat. Okay, great. Look at how great we're doing. We're reducing costs, that kind of stuff. But now some of the things that you said, you have to innovate. You have to look at AI. You have to be open to these different things that are coming. The way the mortgage industry is, forget about 5 years from now, forget about 2030. In the next 12 months, it's going to look completely different than where we are today.
The velocity of decision-making driven by AI, making possible by AI, is extraordinary. It used to be that, obviously with the internet, we had the ability to kind of know everything, right? Because we can Google it, right? Yeah. All of a sudden, if I said to you, what's the big, the tallest mountain in China, you'd say, I don't really know. Let me look it up. And in 1990, we would have gone to an encyclopedia. In 1998, we could Google it and determine within a few seconds to know exactly what the tallest mountain in China is. In today's environment, we're able to ask very complicated questions because of AI. Like what is the perfect profit model, and the most successful, going across over 100 mortgage companies? What are some successful and more profitable growth strategies that I should run my mortgage company? I can type that into an AI model. And as long as the right sort of data feedback pieces are in there, it's actually going to, here's actually a good example, a better example, I should say. I said to myself, I wanted to create a business partnership between a mortgage lender and American Airlines. Mm-hmm. And I said, who would I talk to? What would my pitch be? And what would the financial model be? And it literally, within a nanosecond, it provided me, it did the research, it found the head of partnerships, it listed her phone number, It listed her email address, and it actually gave me the metrics that are most commonly successful or used by American Airlines. And then it gave me sort of a sample pitch deck of what metrics I would use from a mortgage standpoint, what would be valuable to them, and what would they do of value to a mortgage company. And so it gave me the whole pitch.
Yep.
And then it said, do you want me to create a presentation like that for you? And so our ability, I call it the velocity of decision making. Our ability to make decisions at an increasingly faster rate than we've ever been able to do before is going to be able to separate. I call it the great separator between companies that are truly going to be competitors and those who are truly going to lag behind in the competition. AI is going to be the great separator.
Yeah. How exciting. That's the way I look at it. How exciting. Like I literally say I'm so happy that I'm able to witness this, right? Like when you think back, we started this conversation saying that many years ago, before social media, before digital connection, you had to go to a conference to meet other people, right? And now we sit in a world that you can bring this together. Now let's add AI into the mortgage industry. And we're so lucky to be able to see this point in time in the mortgage industry, because it's going to really separate those people that are going to take it to the next level and those that not only are going to lag behind, but probably not even exist in the future. And we know that.
Yeah.
So it's exciting. It's a great time.
Massive shakeup. I think there'll be a massive shakeup in the top 25. And I think the reality is, I think banks are going to continue to lose market share because banks tend to be serious laggards to technology depositories. So there'll be some compression in the depository market share. And then there'll be serious expansion. I think it's going to be continued expansion in the distributed retail market share because of their investments in technology. And I think the TPO segments are going to hold their own largely because of investments in technology that UWM and Rocket are going to be able to deliver to those channels that the independent mortgage broker won't have to worry about. They're just going to be the beneficiaries of those investments. So that'll make it easier to originate and drive volume. So I think you'll see a continued tension between retail and TPO, but there'll be more of that market because the depositories will slowly shrink a few percentage points in their market share. And I think there'll be more market available for the TPO and the retail.
It always has to exist. Both have to exist, right? Oh, regardless. It will always be there, and there's plenty of opportunity for all. Well, Rick, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with all of us. This was a phenomenal conversation. And for everyone, Rick, how can people find you, locate you, keep continuing to follow you and learn more about all that you have to offer?
Honestly, I think the best way of staying in contact with me is really just message me on LinkedIn. Follow me on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn. I think that's just the best and fastest way of doing it. Because I just think that email addresses change, cell phone numbers change, but the best way is just connect with me on LinkedIn because that's where I get the most engagement with people within the industry.
Fabulous. Everyone, make sure you're following Rick and stay in contact with him because he is on the pulse of our industry. And we thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with all of us.
Thank you, Laura. Appreciate you very much. Appreciate your leadership, Laura.